Chris, thank you so much for being here. And I just want to reiterate what my friend was saying. We have lots of great seats in the front. You don't want to miss this conversation because if you want to talk about radical transparency, there is no better company to talk about it than a company that practices its own version of radical transparency, which is Reddit. So, Chris, thank you for being with us today.
Thanks for having me, and thanks.
So Reddit has 4 trust pillars, which are security, privacy, safety, and transparency. And you say that this is the foundation of Reddit's platform. So what does that mean exactly?
Let me spend a minute talking about how we think about Reddit, which is that, the mission of Reddit is we want to bring community and belonging to the world, which, community's become a bit of an overloaded term in the social space. Everyone likes to talk about it. We've been doing it since before it was cool. And so we think about ourselves as being a set of communities that are all interacting. And so the interaction model for our users is to have trust, not just with the platform, but to have trust with the communities and trust with one another. So we've basically tried to set up the way we operate to align the way that we operate and to provide users a way to trust one another. So for example, the oldest thing in the book on Reddit has been voting. Voting arrows are the first thing we had. They predate having communities. And so that meant that at any given time, we could ensure that the best content appeared by making sure there was a certain kind of integrity to the votes, right? The whole community is able to go through and do basically a moderation pass by saying like, upvote, downvote, straight up. When we added the moderation layers, we wanted to make sure that we provided a means that the users could trust that moderators are behaving appropriately and vice versa. And so we gave the moderators an ability to set rules for their communities. And the rules are set up in such a way that they're transparent. They tell the communities they exist. We also tell why something got taken down as part of the enforcement mechanism. And it also allows this beautiful way where the mods can kind of set up a system where they're able to enforce a set of rules that we can't. So for example, like one of the common rules that exists on Reddit is basically don't be a jerk, right? And there's no way we as a platform can enforce don't be a jerk, but a moderator can sort of say, I can call it when I see it. And ultimately it's about that. Plus I think in terms of our approach to our community, we've been transparent with them from the start to the point where whenever we do something, we make sure to post about it. And in fact, I regularly post on the platform. Our CEO, Steve, has been posting since day one. And so it means that not only are we going to tell about what we're thinking, we're going to kind of get our knocks if the community doesn't like it and have to be able to be really authentic about it.
Yeah. And I want to come back to the whole philosophy behind even starting from that place of trust where you trust your moderators, you trust your users to give you honest, candid feedback. But before we get there, I mean, you are a CTO, so I want to talk about the engineering piece of it. How do you technically engineer a platform that has this kind of trust pillar philosophy at its core?
It comes with a bunch of things. So I think the first and earliest thing that we did was really the whole voting mechanism, like I mentioned. And so there had to be a lot of work very early on to make sure that there was a certain amount of integrity in the votes. I've had a running joke forever that I've said before, which is that we count every vote, but that doesn't mean that every vote counts. And it's sort of a way to make sure that, like, if there's inauthentic behavior, we have a means to go through and figure it out that's happening. And in a way to kind of like ensure that it's the whatever the intent of the community to get to the front page or to the top of comment threads is actually there. The second thing is that, we've architected in such a way that we went against the grain and basically decided that we don't want to have real identity behind the user. You don't have to say who you are. And in fact, we kind of went the other way, which is to say, you can be as many yous as you want on the platform. In analogy with, we always talk about having like your work persona and your home persona and your, like the third place persona. If you are into gardening and you want to talk about gardening, you should go into your gardening community and be your gardener. But if you're also going through like a painful divorce, you might not want to have that be something that you actually have present in your gardening persona. So you can go in and actually have those other conversations separately. And so it gives you a chance to kind of like almost compartmentalize and share what you want to share and not overshare. So I think the tricky part there is really making sure that we provide mechanisms to switch between those accounts in a way that's kind of like natural and also doesn't create more inauthenticity. I think what we found overall is that the third thing is that because we've decided to go this route of saying like, you can be as many yous as you want to be, it actually there's no real incentive to kind of be a poser, to be totally frank, right? Like, what are you going to get? You're going to get some stupid internet points at the end of the day. Whereas like, you're actually encouraged to be authentic because you're just being you.
Yeah. So again, without getting too much into the weeds, you do need to create a mechanism for me to have my gardening persona and my soon-to-be divorcee persona. And so and yet, I guess this gets to the core of how you want to measure and, in essence, maintain your relationship with your communities. Is there a sense that that is one identity and multiple different usernames, or how do you think about it from a technology standpoint?
Yeah, so from that standpoint, it becomes a question too of one of the things that we have to do as a platform is to enforce user safety, right? And of course, part of that, the double-edged sword of having an identity which is flexible is that, it begs the question of how do you not have people running around with a bunch of alt accounts and doing malicious things? And that's where we have to basically have a way to decide okay, so for 98% of people on the platform, and I do mean people, they're actual humans, mostly. On the internet, nobody knows you're a dog, is of course the old analogy. Maybe it's now no one knows you're ChatGPT, I'm not really sure.
We're going to get to that.
We'll get to that later. But for ensuring that 98% of people actually are kind of they're good and they're funny and they're they just want to be left alone or they just want to engage. And there's 2% who are ultimately jerks. And so the game is to set up a system where you can actually detect the jerks being jerks. And in those cases, maybe start to figure out okay, are they doing ban evasion? Are they acting in a way that's outside of our content policies, our actual site-wide policies, and enforce without having to violate the privacy of the rest of the user base. So it's really a game of operationally making sure that we can detect those kinds of behaviors separately from the 98% good cases.
So if I'm a company in this audience that didn't start my company from a place of trust, what would I have to do to re-engineer my platform or my technology to become more trustworthy or more trust-focused?
I think trust is earned. Trust takes a long time to accumulate. And so the first thing I would say is start now. I think some of the reasons why we made the choices we did is because, the original founding group, we ourselves were users of the platform. And so it wasn't that we were thinking about the particular marketing or comms or, the angle of what we were posting. Is we were just actually saying oh yeah, you guys all want this thing. We actually think it's a bad idea, or we think here's a reason why we shouldn't do it. And then having that actual conversation. I think that there's something about the way that those little seeds, and we've been doing this for 18 years now, and I can say this with certainty, the seeds of culture really do stick around for a very long time. And so for Reddit, it's been kind of this open, snarky, skeptical, engaged user base that really can sort of sniff inauthenticity from a mile. And so it means that you have to basically talk to them as if they are people who are sitting next to you, as opposed to it's how can I give a non-answer here? A non-answer is the most dangerous thing you could possibly do on Reddit. They will knock that out. I think for a company, it really is think about how you engage with your users and just be open and honest, right? They're going to be able to tell when you're lying. And if they can't, they'll eventually learn. They'll be able to actually have more authentic conversations. Listening to your users helps you build a better product at the end of the day. So yeah.
Is trust ever at odds with security?
I think that it can be tricky in that, of course, security, there's always discussions of security by obscurity, right? It's not the best model, but it does actually work until you figure it out. I think when you're talking about things like platform trust, we actually go the other way, and actually we post about when we have a security incident as quickly as possible. We post about whenever we do a transparency report. We don't just push the transparency report out. We actually engage with our users and say, here's what this means. Because of course, a transparency report is very structured. There's going to be some legalness in it. And being able to explain it in plain terms is actually very valuable and have that conversation. I'd say overall, it's been kind of quite the opposite of whenever there is something that is, when we have an incident, for example, it's actually very valuable to go to the users and say hey, we just had a thing. Here's what happened. And I've found those situations, as painful as they are to do, and to say mea culpa, we failed you in this way. They would rather hear that you're doing something about it and something happened. But I think the worst case is the opposite of don't talk about it, and then find out 5 months later that somebody announces that Reddit was popped.
Because it's very rare, unless there is personal identifiable information that's released and then companies are compelled to. But I'm just curious, when you have had these security incidents, is there much debate internally about how much transparency and even whether to be transparent?
No, honestly. So I think it's actually quite the opposite. It's usually a game of like, how quickly can we talk about this and what do we say? Now, of course, we can never be 100% transparent, because at some point it becomes like, you don't necessarily want to disclose methods. You don't want to disclose certain things that might end up being like releasing more information about your users than you would have otherwise. But we do want to make sure that, look, the ability to post about it means that the larger ecosystem of other companies and other security agencies know that something's going on, and they're able to react and prepare for it. So, I mean, as an example, we just had this happen a couple months ago. I am actually currently about 2 months into being interim CISO in addition to being CTO. And literally my first Monday, I walked into a sub-zero security incident, which was a delight. And it was a situation where like we got together comms by that Thursday and we posted about it, and I had a good couple hours talking to the community, and the general response was, "Thank you for being so transparent and letting us know."
You had talked earlier about how authenticity is so important and how moderators and other users can sniff out that inauthenticity almost immediately. There was recently a story about a lot of moderators spotting content on certain forums that was clearly written by, that they felt was written by an artificial intelligence bot. I'm curious to get a sense of how you think that this will impact the platform, if at all. And let's talk a little bit about some of the tools that you might need to give your moderators as this proliferates and as maybe the smell test isn't going to be quite as accurate.
Yeah, I think that this has been a lot of discussion for us right now. And I'd say that where we're starting right now is to figure out, okay, what's the reason why somebody would want to post an AI-generated bit of content on something like Reddit, right? And so, the two sides of it are, there's the text side and there's the image side. And maybe I'll treat them separately. So on the text side, that turns into so you wrote a bot to chat on Reddit. That's not an unusual thing on Reddit. In fact, Reddit's full of self-identified bots to try to be helpful. And so to some extent, like, we actually think that that's a good use case for AI, which is like, if you identify as a bot, great. If you're not going to identify as a bot, then it becomes a game of like, okay, so are you trying to eventually turn that in a way to generate a bunch of karma, to push some spam or some unauthentic content later? That is a tale as old as time. That's the spam 101 method, right? And so that's like a straightforward, like, we see users doing that, and we have for since time immemorial, and we just bucket that under like, yeah, you're being inauthentic, banned for you. There's potentially at this stage of development, there might be some bragging rights of like, it's like, oh, I made a bot on Reddit and I had them going for 3 months, and look at how cool I am. Same kind of thing as inauthentic content. It is like a wow factor, but there's not really a lot of value because the account itself doesn't have a lot of, like, there's not a broadcast mechanism for the accounts, right? The only utility of an account or of the content is within the community. So the third case is actually, you write a bot that is a chat bot running AI that's actually helpful to the community. And that feels like almost the situation of like, okay, that's a change in the culture. It's like, I'm dealing with this agent that is actually not malicious, is being helpful, and I can engage with on a human term. That feels like a really interesting, fun edge. And I think that's actually gets to my second point about images. The most blow-ups we've seen have been in like art communities, where it's like, oh yeah, no AI generated art, which to me, like, now that I can say this with my gray beard, feels like 20 years ago when Photoshop first appeared, right? It's like, Photoshop, oh my God, the images, like, you can't trust images anymore, you can hack them, right? And all it created certain niche communities around photography and analog photography and Polaroids, right? But everyone accepts the fact that like a little touch-up is okay. I mean, heck, it's on your phone for the most part these days. I think it's now a game of watching the culture catch up. And I also think that, so to some extent, getting really long-winded here, it feels like it feels almost like we kind of assumed that AI was always going to help us with like the really menial stuff of like, it's like robots helping us in factories, right? And like, then we'd all be like a bunch of idle artists at all times. Nope. Turns out AI is really good at art. Or like at least a brand of somewhat derivative art that is kind of generically nice looking.
Yeah. So to go back to the example you cited, which is someone creates a bot that actually is helpful to the community. Are you seeing that yet? Are there examples in Reddit forums where that's happening?
I don't think we're seeing anything specifically called out for the new breed of LLMs. But we have definitely for a very long time had an ecosystem of bots who attempt to be helpful, right? It's like, and they're I wouldn't necessarily refer to what they're doing as AI. Like sometimes they're just simple heuristics. It's like I don't know if anyone knows the joke about welcome to cat facts. That's an really old internet one. But like they pick up on keywords, or there's like, metric conversion bot. If somebody says something in feet, they'll actually immediately convert it to metric. There are other ones that actually do try to be more helpful and explain things. And I think that's actually a place where if they're self-identified and usually the username has the word bot in it, it's a really great outcome to some extent.
I was at an event a couple of weeks ago, and Deepak Chopra was talking about a bot that he has created, I believe, with Cambridge. And it's designed for children who are teenagers who are experiencing suicidal thoughts. And according to Chopra, the young people actually prefer talking to the bot than a human because they don't feel judged. And it's kind of an interesting example of how, again, it's self-identified. Everybody knows that this is not a human intervention, that you are talking to a machine, and yet they're seeing examples of young people taking to it better than they would to a human therapist because they are more comfortable with that interaction.
I mean, that goes back 60 years to the original Eliza as like the first bot therapist, which was written in, I think, like, I want to say it was written in like 100 lines of COBOL, right? It's like, even researchers who knew they were talking to a bot felt it was really nice to talk to a bot and like ask a bunch of simple questions to reflect. I think that's the not judging thing. It's actually kind of funny because I feel like actually a lot of the time on Reddit, it's the opposite situation where you have people appear who want to be judged.
It's interesting because we've talked about these pillars of transparency, right? Security, safety, privacy, transparency. What's the intersectionality of those? I mean, you can take them each individually, and I think there are companies that would say transparency is important to me, security is important to me, but they think about them almost as independent of one another. What's the interdependency, if anything?
I like to think of it as almost like all of the security, privacy, and transparency feed into trust, right? You kind of can't have, at least on a platform like Reddit, you can't really have trust without those pieces and blown together, right? If you don't have a notion of an authentic conversation with the community and telling them what's going on and posting about security incidents, they're not going to trust your ability to hold their data. If you don't have a good notion of how you handle user privacy and user identity, they're not going to trust that they are able to be authentic on the platform. And then, of course, security, it's like, yeah, I mean, there's a bunch of table stakes work to make sure that we can actually defend their data more than anything else. So I really do think that, like, I've seen an industry trend to move towards like less talking about CISOs and CSOs and more talking about these kind of chief trust officer and VP of trust. And I think that actually makes a lot of sense because it does kind of better wrap up. It's like it's like the next generation of cybersecurity as a notion.
Yeah. And so just to kind of bring it back to the culture of Reddit, and we sort of started there. You're a member of the founding team you're a co-founder and have been there since the beginning. How does that culture of trust impact Reddit as a workplace? How does that affect the people who come to work for you, and what kind of people don't fit in when you have a culture of trust?
We have a one of the things that's taken time to figure out over the years has been what are the values that we want to have for Reddit the company versus what are the ones we want to have for Reddit the platform, and they should naturally intersect in a lot of ways, right? There are cases where there's some things that you can only do on the platform, something you can only do in the company, but the ones that actually are common are things like default open is one of our main values. And in that case, we try to live that in our internal comms and our internal discussions as much as we do on the platform. We have another one that goes back very far, which is remember the human, which actually is about remembering that like there's probably a person on the far side of that computer, which before the pandemic was actually you'd see your coworkers in person and you'd see your Redditor on the computer. Now it's like everybody's on the far side of a computer, so it actually gets even better. And I think that it's what we've generated in the company is like generally a fairly trusting, very kind culture internally. Also somewhat snarky, kind of goes with the territory. But we try to do it in a way where we try to be as inclusive as possible because we can't imagine we're going to be able to build a community for everybody if we don't have representatives of that community inside the shop.
Right. Chris, thank you so much for this conversation. It was really interesting. I hope everyone has walked away with some really great ideas about transparency, security, privacy. And I love the idea that this whole direction for security is really moving to a chief trust officer rather than a chief security officer. So thank you for your time.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you, everyone.